was thinking about this chapel talk, I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what I was drawn to. I didn't have an impressive, adventurous trip to talk about. I didn't want to make it a heartwarming, emotional release, and I wasn't trying to give some profound advice or inspiration. For a long time, I didn't know what to say. What I knew was that I felt this mysterious urge to give a chapel talk for a while, just because it's a way to tell a story or send a message that people wouldn't typically get to hear. We all gather here and listen to somebody's thoughts, really. I don't always realize it, but the speeches given here are like little slices of a person that we get to see through this tiny window for 15 minutes. So for me, this is an opportunity to reflect on a personal experience, and maybe somebody hears something that strikes them in one way or another. One sentence, even, that they connect with, relate to, think about for more than a few seconds. Maybe it echoes something they see in themselves or reminds them of something. Maybe they intensely disagree with something I say, in which case I'm glad to have triggered a reaction that strong. I'm not giving this talk with any objective other than to share some thoughts. In fact, I know and appreciate that this chapel talk is going to mean something different for everyone sitting here, just like every chapel talk means something different for every speaker and every listener. That being said, I'll move on to the actual thinking part. I'm going to talk to you about one of the words that scares me the most, a heavy, ominous, 6-letter word, regret. I think I'm partly drawn to this topic because it's one of the things I've struggled with for as long as I can remember. For me, regret is one of the worst feelings out there. For example, my very first night at Millbrook. I was a little freshman, clueless, straight out of public school. My family had no connection to private school, much less boarding school, and I was overwhelmed, to say the least. I couldn't see myself fitting in, and I began to seriously doubt that it was real. It was all so unfamiliar, like I was a foreigner in my body. And I broke down. There I was, past 10 o'clock, sitting on my bed, sleeplessly. It was a top bunk, something that I've never had before, and everything felt off. I wondered aimlessly why the heck I thought I could do this. It was one of the deepest regrets I've ever experienced. Then I tried to go to the bathroom to wash my face, and of course, the door got stuck. So I shook it in panic, feeling like my world was collapsing until the dorm leaders yanked it open from the other side. And I played it cool, got a few hours of sleep, but I felt so weak and helpless, and I realized how much regret sucks. The next day, we debunked the beds, and I started to get to know this place, and it got better. But since then, regret has become like this dark cloud looming in the back of my mind. In fact, I probably spend a solid 80% of my time regretting things. Times I didn't hold on to somebody tight enough, and times I didn't let go soon enough. Things I didn't say but should have, things I said and shouldn't have. There are big things like people I've done wrong by and choices I've made. But there are also smaller things like awkward hellos and goodbyes from years ago and things I wish I didn't post on Facebook. In fact, I will probably spend the next 3 weeks regretting the way I worded one of these sentences. And I will obsess over it because that's what I do. I regret something, big or small, until another thing comes up and takes its place. Then I push the old regret away and focus on the new one. But sometimes, just out of the blue, as I'm walking to class or showering or something, I remember one of the regrets from years ago. Like that time I let the kid next to me in kindergarten talk to me and got sent to the back of the room for being loud. Or in middle school when I almost accepted somebody else's flowers after a talent show. The talent show, another regret, by the way. So regret, for me, is one of the hardest things to overcome. At the same time, though, what I've come to believe throughout my high school career is that regret is absolutely useless. This idea of no regrets is not an uncommon thing. We're supposed to live in the moment, not dwell on silly things from the past, because everything that happens to you goes into the person you become. When I was a third former here, my big physics presentation was on string theory and alternative dimensions. According to my research, the fourth dimension is actually time. Since then, I've been thinking a lot about this theory that time is much, much bigger than what we experience. Every choice you make leads you down a different sequence of events, different timeline, essentially creating the version of yourself that you are. But time is fluid, so every alternative choice leads to a different version of you, and perhaps that version is existing somewhere else in time and space right now. But because we only experience our timeline, we could never encounter our alternates. But the other versions of us can be so dramatically different. So I think when I'm regretting something, what I'm actually doing is imagining what all those other Tories look like. Maybe she's extraordinarily different. Maybe she's into sports or math, or maybe she hates peanut butter and ice cream and sweet potato. Maybe she stayed at her old school or joined a circus or dyed her hair. Maybe her family moved to Alaska, or she has sisters instead of 3 brothers. For some reason, though, I always imagine that she's better off. She's happier or smarter or more satisfied. She made the right choice at one of those points I regret. She's like me, but better. I don't know where this assumption comes from. Maybe it's just insecurity or pessimism, but in reality, we have absolutely no clue what could have happened in our lives. We don't know how any choice would actually affect us or other people. The smallest thing could have resulted in an unimaginably horrible outcome. It exists everywhere in fiction, the butterfly effect. You travel back in time to do something and fix something you regret and make a change, maybe as small as eating a ham sandwich for lunch instead of a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. It triggers an intense chain reaction, and sometime much later in your life, you get crushed under a piano falling from a building. Or even worse, a random innocent person gets hit by the piano. We cannot possibly know what chain reactions our daily choices set off. If Aaron Burr hadn't killed Alexander Hamilton, for example, we wouldn't have the amazing Broadway show. And while Aaron Burr might have regretted shooting his rival, he couldn't have possibly predicted that people would be singing about it in 2016. So if you eat that ham sandwich, you might end up in a musical, or you might indirectly kill somebody with a piano. That's the logic, and I do agree with it to an extent. But to be honest, if I had a time machine, there probably are some things I would change. I wouldn't be able to predict the butterfly effect, but I can still imagine changes ultimately leading to a more satisfied version of myself. The conclusion I've reached, though, is that none of that matters because I don't have a time machine, and until I do, weighing my regrets doesn't do anything for me. If I'm ever presented with the choice to change things, I'll respond to it however I see fit. But for now, all I can do is respond to choices I am presented with. I'll consider the situations and circumstances as they happen and do whatever seems best. Maybe the other option would have stopped some bad things from happening, but it probably would have also stopped some good things from happening. The choices I make are going to lead to people, connections, and experiences that will each be adding to who I am. So really, it's all the same. Whatever choices I make are right and wrong and significant in some way. So regretting them is simply useless. I think another reason I was drawn to talk about this is because it feels very relevant at this time of year. The school year is coming to an end. It's a time of reflection on the year and perhaps the years before. We start to think about what has changed and how we got to this place. I and the rest of the senior class are just making the big choices that will potentially determine our future. So I've been hearing a lot of this regret stuff going around, and I still find myself endlessly weighing options and worrying whether or not a choice is right. I regret parts of the college process and constantly wonder what could have been different. I wonder if years from now, I'll be doing the same. But as I do it, I remember how unproductive regret is. If anyone figures out how to truly live without regrets, please do let me know. But if there is supposed to be some advice at the end of this chapel talk, then I'm suggesting not to give regret so much weight. Not because it's going to crush an innocent civilian under a falling piano, but because it is irrelevant to the circumstances and decisions at hand. Thank you.